The attack began at dawn. Across 3 continents, resistance fighters struck hegemony positions with coordinated precision. Valdorian warriors emerged from their underground cities. Human rebels used Pete's communication devices to synchronize their movements. Amy's trained healers rushed to free prisoners from mind control facilities. Jake and his small team moved toward Mount Taylor, while explosions lit up the sky around them. The plan was working. Enemy forces were being pulled away from the mountain to deal with attacks everywhere else. But Jake knew they still faced the hardest part of their mission. Mount Taylor rose from the southern desert like a giant crystal spear. The hegemony had built their base around the mountain's peak, where the largest amplification crystals grew. Energy shields protected the base from air attack. Weapon platforms covered every approach route. "How do we get through all that?" asked Carlos, one of the Valdorian fighters on Jake's team. "We don't fight our way through," Jake said. "We sneak through." Ember, hidden in the special pack on Jake's back, reached out with her mind to scan the enemy base. "There is a maintenance tunnel that leads into the mountain," she reported through their mental link. "The entrance is on the north side, hidden behind a sensor array." "Can you disable the sensors?" Jake asked. "Not without alerting them to my presence, but I can confuse them, make the sensors show empty space instead of our real positions." It was risky. Using her telepathic abilities this close to the enemy base would make Ember detectable to their scanning equipment. But it was their only chance to get inside unnoticed. Jake's team crept around the base of the mountain, staying low and moving slowly. When they reached the sensor array, Ember carefully extended her mind and began altering what the devices reported. The sensors showed clear ground while Jake and his team crawled past them into the maintenance tunnel. The tunnel was narrow and dark, lit only by emergency strips along the walls. Jake led the way with Ember still hidden in her pack. Behind him came Carlos and 3 other Valdorian fighters, all armed with weapons Pete had modified to work against hegemony armor. They climbed through the tunnel for an hour, before reaching a maintenance hatch that opened into the base's lower levels. Jake carefully lifted the hatch and peered out into a corridor lined with pipes and cables. The area was empty, but they could hear enemy soldiers moving on levels above them. "The crystal chamber is at the top of the mountain," Ember whispered into Jake's mind. "We need to go up 20 levels. Can you sense how many enemies are between us and there?" Jake asked. Ember extended her telepathic senses carefully. 40 soldiers on the route we need to take, but most of them are distracted by reports from the other attacks. They do not expect anyone to be inside their base. Jake's team moved through the base like ghosts. When they encountered enemy soldiers, Ember would touch the soldiers' minds and make them look the other way or remember urgent tasks in different parts of the base. It was exhausting for her, but it kept them from being discovered. They reached the 20th level just as alarms began sounding throughout the base. On the other side of the planet, Pete's biggest attack had succeeded in destroying a major hegemony supply depot. Enemy commanders were screaming orders and demanding reinforcements. "Perfect timing," Jake said. "Everyone will be focused on the attacks. Now we just need to reach the crystal chamber." The chamber was behind a massive steel door guarded by 2 soldiers in powered armor. These guards could not be confused or distracted like the others. They were too well trained and too alert. "I will handle them," Carlos said, raising his modified weapon. "Wait," Jake said. "Let's try something else first." He opened Ember's pack and helped her climb out. The little dragon had grown even more during their journey. She was now the size of a wolf, her scales gleaming with health and power. Her golden eyes burned with determination. "Can you make them sleep?" Jake asked. "I can try," Ember said, "but it will reveal my presence to every sensor in the base." "Do it." "We're out of time anyway." Ember focused her telepathic abilities on the 2 guards. Instead of trying to confuse them, she reached deep into their minds and found the part that controlled sleep. Gently but firmly, she pushed them into unconsciousness. Both soldiers collapsed without making a sound, but alarms immediately began shrieking throughout the base. Red lights flashed in the corridors. Enemy voices shouted about detecting a telepathic presence. "They know we're here," Jake said. "Move fast." Carlos used his weapon to blast the door lock. The massive steel door swung open to reveal the crystal chamber beyond. Jake gasped at what he saw inside. The chamber was enormous, carved from the living rock of the mountain. Crystals of every size and color grew from the walls, floor, and ceiling. Some were as small as pebbles. Others were larger than trees. All of them pulsed with energy that made the air itself seem alive. In the center of the chamber stood the Master Crystal, a formation as tall as a building and as wide as a house. It glowed with power that hurt to look at directly. "That one," Ember said, staring at the Master Crystal. "That one can carry my voice to the stars." Jake helped Ember climb onto the Master Crystal. As soon as her claws touched its surface, the entire formation began to glow brighter. Power flowed through the crystal network like lightning through metal wires. "Hurry," Carlos called from the doorway. "Enemy soldiers are coming up the stairs." Ember closed her eyes and reached out with every bit of telepathic power she possessed. The crystals amplified her mental voice 1,000-fold, sending it racing through space toward the nearest coalition fleet. Jake felt the message as Ember sent it. He experienced her memories of the war, her determination to fight back, and her desperate hope that someone would hear and care enough to help. The message was not just words, but pure emotion, impossible to ignore or misunderstand. In a star system 3 light-years away, Admiral Sarah Kim felt something touch her mind while she reviewed battle reports on her flagship. The mental voice was young but strong, carrying images of suffering and courage that brought tears to her eyes. "We are still fighting," the voice said. "We refuse to surrender. This world has crystals that could make the enemy's mind control technology unstoppable. Help us stop them. Help us prove that hope is stronger than fear." Admiral Kim had heard many distress calls during the war, but never one like this. She could feel the truth in every word, the genuine courage of people who would rather die than give up. More importantly, she understood the strategic threat the crystals represented. "Communications," she called to her crew. "Send a message to all ships in the fleet. We are changing course for the Valdris system. Maximum speed." Back in the crystal chamber, Ember collapsed from the effort of sending her message. Jake caught her as she fell and held her close. "Did it work?" he asked. "Yes," Ember whispered. "They heard me. They are coming." Explosions echoed through the chamber as hegemony soldiers tried to blast their way through the door Carlos was defending. The Valdorian fighter's weapon was powerful, but he was outnumbered 50-1. "We need to hold this position until help arrives," Jake said. "How long?" Carlos asked between shots. Ember reached out with her weakened telepathic senses. "The coalition fleet will be here in 4 hours. But the enemy is bringing everyone in the base to attack us." Jake looked around the crystal chamber and made a decision. "Then we make our stand here." Among these crystals, Ember's telepathic abilities are stronger. She can coordinate resistance fighters across the planet while we hold this position. For the next 4 hours, Jake's small team fought the most important battle of their lives. Wave after wave of hegemony soldiers attacked the crystal chamber. Carlos and his Valdorian fighters held the doorway, while Jake protected Ember as she used the crystals to coordinate resistance activities around the planet. Through her telepathic network, Ember told every fighter when enemy reinforcements were moving, where attacks would be most effective, and how to avoid traps. The resistance had never been so well coordinated. They began winning battles they should have lost. Then, just as Jake's team was running out of ammunition, the sky above Mount Taylor exploded with light. Coalition warships dropped out of hyperspace and immediately began attacking hegemony positions. Admiral Kim had brought her entire fleet, and they were angry about what they found on Valdris. The battle in space was short and brutal. Coalition ships were faster and better armed than the hegemony vessels that had been occupying the planet. Within an hour, every enemy ship had been destroyed or forced to retreat. On the ground, hegemony soldiers found themselves cut off from supplies and reinforcements. Many surrendered immediately. Others tried to fight but were overwhelmed by resistance fighters who suddenly had air support and fresh weapons. In the crystal chamber, Jake held Ember as they watched the last enemy soldiers retreat down the mountain. The little dragon who had called across the stars for help had saved her entire world. "You did it," Jake said. "You saved everyone." "We did it," Ember corrected him. "None of this would have been possible without you." Over the following weeks, coalition forces helped the people of Valdris rebuild their world. The underground cities became busy again. The crystal formations were protected as strategic resources. Most importantly, the planet became a symbol of hope for other worlds fighting the hegemony. 3 days passed before Jake began to notice the strange details about his new companion. The creature was getting stronger, eating the scraps of food Jake brought from the station cafeteria, and sleeping most of the day while Jake worked. But as it healed, Jake started to see things that did not make sense. The creature's wings were not just broken. They had been cut. Jake found the scars when he was changing the bandages on its leg. Someone had used a sharp tool to slice through the wing muscles in a very precise way. This was not an accident or a fight with another animal. Someone had done this on purpose. Jake felt sick when he realized what this meant. Someone had crippled this creature so it could never fly. But why would anyone do such a thing? He started spending his free time in the station's computer library, looking up information about dragon-like aliens. What he found made him even more worried. The creatures were called Drakmori, and they came from the far side of the galaxy. Most of the files said they were extinct, killed off in some ancient war. But a few reports mentioned that they were highly intelligent and could grow to be very large. The creature in Jake's apartment was clearly a Drakmori, but it was much too small. According to the files, even young Drakmori should be the size of large dogs. This one was no bigger than a cat, even though its eyes seemed old and wise. Jake found more scars on the creature's neck when he was cleaning it, tiny marks that looked like needle holes. Someone had been giving it injections for a long time. Jake began to suspect that the creature's small size was not natural. Someone had been keeping it small on purpose. The more Jake learned, the angrier he became. This creature had been tortured and experimented on. That was the only explanation for its condition. But who would do such things and why? Despite everything it had been through, the creature was remarkably gentle and smart. Jake started calling it Spark because of the way its scales seemed to glow when it was happy. Spark learned Jake's schedule quickly, hiding under the bed when Jake left for work and greeting him at the door when he came home. Spark also started helping with small tasks around the apartment. When Jake dropped a tool while fixing a broken lamp, Spark would pick it up in its mouth and bring it to him. When Jake was reading at his desk, Spark would curl up next to his arm, its scales warm against his skin. Jake began to feel that Spark understood human speech, though it never made sounds except for small chirps and purrs. When Jake talked to it, Spark would tilt its head and look at him with those intelligent golden eyes. Sometimes Jake felt like Spark was trying to communicate something important, but he could not understand what. The first real sign of trouble came on Jake's fourth day of caring for Spark. His supervisor, Carl Peterson, called him into the office after his shift ended. Carl was a big man with gray hair and suspicious eyes. He had been running the mechanical depot for 15 years and noticed everything that happened on his watch. "Jake, I need to talk to you," Carl said, closing the office door behind them. "Your work has been sloppy this week. You made 3 mistakes on the cargo hauler repairs and you fell asleep at your workstation yesterday." Jake felt his face get hot. He had been staying up late taking care of Spark and was exhausted most of the time. But he could not tell Carl the real reason. "I'm sorry, Carl, I haven't been sleeping well. I'll do better." Carl stared at him for a long moment. "Jake, you've been one of my best workers for 5 years. This isn't like you. Is there something going on I should know about?" "No, sir. Just some personal stuff." "It won't happen again." "Personal stuff?" Carl's eyes got narrow. "Jake, you know the rules about keeping contraband in the worker quarters. If you've got something you shouldn't have, it's better to tell me now." Jake's heart started beating fast. Did Carl know about Spark? Had someone seen him bringing food back to his apartment? "I don't have any contraband, Carl. I'm just tired." Carl watched him for another long moment, then nodded. "All right, but I'm going to be keeping an eye on you, and if I find out you're hiding something, we're going to have a much more serious conversation. Understood?" "Understood." Jake left the office with his hands shaking. Carl suspected something, and it was only a matter of time before he decided to search Jake's apartment. Security could do that anytime they wanted, and Jake would not be able to stop them. That night, Jake sat on his bed and watched Spark eat dinner. The creature was much stronger now, and its broken leg was healing well, but Jake knew they were running out of time. Soon Carl or someone else would discover their secret. And then what would happen to Spark? Jake started making plans to move Spark somewhere safer. There were abandoned storage areas in the lower levels of the station where they might be able to hide. But those places were cold and dark, and Jake did not know how long Spark could survive there. As Jake was packing supplies into a bag, thinking about where they could go, something incredible happened. Spark, who had been lying on the bed watching Jake work, suddenly stood up and looked directly at him. "Jake Morrison of Earth," Spark said in perfect, clear English, "you have shown kindness to one who was thought lost. For this, I must share with you a truth that could doom us both." Jake dropped the bag he was holding. His mouth fell open and he stared at Spark in complete shock. The creature had just spoken to him in his own language with no accent or difficulty. But that was impossible. Spark had never made any sound except chirps and purrs. "You can talk?" Jake whispered. Spark's scales shifted from purple to a deep gold color. "I have always been able to speak your language, Jake Morrison. But I had to be certain that you could be trusted before I revealed myself." Jake sat down hard on his chair, his legs suddenly weak. "How long have you been able to understand everything I've said?" "From the moment you found me behind the fuel containers. I heard you promise not to hurt me, and I felt your gentle hands caring for my wounds. You could have turned me over to station security, but you chose to risk your own safety to protect mine." Jake's mind was spinning. "What are you?" "I mean, I know you're a Drakmori, but the files say your people are extinct." Spark's golden eyes grew sad. "The files lie, Jake Morrison. My people are not extinct, but we are very few, and we are hunted. Hunted? By who? By those who would steal our memories and use our knowledge for evil purposes. I'm not what I appear to be. My name is Vexhai Doran, and I am the last surviving member of the Drakmori Council of Memories." Jake felt like the room was spinning around him. Council of Memories? What does that mean? "It means I carry within my mind the history and knowledge of my entire species, going back millions of years. The experiments that were performed on me were attempts to extract that knowledge by force." "Experiments?" Jake felt sick again. "Someone was experimenting on you?" "For 20 years, Jake Morrison. 20 years of torture and chemical injections trying to break open my mind and steal the secrets within. They kept me small and weak so I could not resist. They crippled my wings so I could not escape." Jake looked at Spark with new eyes. This was not just an injured animal he had rescued. This was a person, a thinking being who had suffered unimaginable torture for decades, and somehow Jake had managed to save him. "Who did this to you?" Jake asked, his voice full of anger. "The Hegemony Coalition," Spark replied. "The alien alliance that rules most of this galaxy. They have been hunting my people for centuries, capturing us and using us as living libraries. They tell other species that we are extinct, but the truth is that we are their slaves." Jake stood up and began pacing around the small room. "Why are you telling me this? If it's so dangerous, why risk it?" Spark's scales shifted back to their normal purple and silver pattern. "Because something has changed, Jake Morrison. When you rescued me and cared for my wounds, you triggered something that has been sleeping in your DNA for millions of years. You are not just a human mechanic. You are something much more important." "What do you mean?" "I mean that your people and my people are connected in ways you cannot imagine. And the bond between us has awakened something that could change the fate of both our species." Jake stared at Spark, trying to understand what he was being told. Everything he thought he knew about the universe was wrong. Aliens were not just different species trading in space. There was a hidden war going on with ancient secrets and terrible crimes, and somehow Jake Morrison, a simple mechanic from Earth, was right in the middle of it. Jake sat down heavily on his bed, staring at Spark with wide eyes. The small creature that he had nursed back to health was actually an ancient being with the memories of an entire civilization. It seemed impossible, but the evidence was right in front of him. "You said my people and your people are connected," Jake said slowly. "What did you mean by that?" Spark moved closer to Jake, his scales shifting to a warm gold color. "Jake Morrison, what I am about to tell you will sound like madness, but every word is true, recorded in the genetic memories that flow through my blood." Genetic memories. My species does not learn history from books or computers. We inherit the experiences of our ancestors directly, passed down through our DNA. I carry within my mind the memories of every Drakmori who came before me. Going back to the beginning of our civilization, Jake tried to understand what that meant. "So you remember things that happened millions of years ago?" "I remember them as if they were my own experiences. I can see through the eyes of my ancestors, feel what they felt, know what they knew, and those memories tell me that your species is not what you think it is." Spark paused, as if gathering courage for what he was about to say. "Humans are not native to Earth, Jake Morrison. Your people are the descendants of a Drakmori colony ship that crashed on your world long ago." Jake felt like the floor had dropped out from under him. "That's impossible. Humans evolved on Earth. We have fossil evidence going back millions of years. The crash happened over 60 million years ago, Jake Morrison. The survivors of my people's ship were genetically modified to adapt to Earth's environment. Over time, they forgot their true origins and believed they had always belonged to that world. Jake stood up and started pacing again. This was too much to believe. But looking at Spark, he could see no deception in those golden eyes. Why would your people genetically modify themselves? They had no choice. The ship was damaged beyond repair, and they could not survive on Earth in their natural form. But the modifications were more than just adaptation. They were designed with a purpose, and what purpose? Spark's scales shifted to a deep blue color that Jake had never seen before. To create guardians, Jake Morrison, your people were designed to protect Drakmori knowledge and help us when the time of great danger came. And you think that time is now? I know it is. The experiments performed on me were part of a larger plan. The Hegemony Coalition has been capturing my people for centuries, torturing us to extract our genetic memories. They have learned many of our secrets, but they want more. Jake sat back down, his head spinning. What kind of secrets? The location of the Drakmori Nexus, the hidden world where the last free members of my species guard the Master Archive. This repository contains not just technology blueprints, but detailed records of every species we have ever encountered, including humans, including the true history of humanity, yes. The Coalition knows that if they can find the Nexus, they will gain access to knowledge that would make them masters of the entire galaxy. They could use that power to enslave or destroy any species that opposes them. Jake felt a cold fear growing in his chest. And they were torturing you to find this place? For 20 years, they injected me with chemicals designed to break down the barriers in my mind. They used machines to probe my memories and tried to force me to reveal the location of the Nexus. But I was able to resist, though it cost me greatly. Jake looked at Spark's small, twisted form and felt a surge of admiration. This creature had endured decades of torture to protect his people's secrets. How did you escape? I did not escape, Jake Morrison. I was discarded. The Coalition scientists believed they had extracted all useful information from me. They threw me away like garbage, assuming I would die quickly in the back alleys of Port Luna. But you survived. Barely, and only because you found me and showed me kindness when you had no reason to do so. That act of pure compassion triggered something in your genetic code, Jake Morrison. The dormant programming left by my ancestors has begun to awaken. Jake looked down at his hands. They looked the same as always, but he had been noticing strange things lately. At work, he seemed to understand how machines worked at a deeper level than before. He could spot problems in systems he had never seen and fix them with an intuitive knowledge that he could not explain. What's happening to me? You are becoming what your people were always meant to be. A guardian of Drakmori knowledge, with the abilities needed to protect that knowledge from those who would misuse it. Spark moved even closer to Jake, until the creature was sitting right next to him on the bed. But Jake Morrison, the awakening process is not complete, and there is great danger coming. What kind of danger? The Coalition has decided that my people are no longer useful to them. They have extracted what they believe are the most valuable secrets from the Drakmori they have captured. Now they plan to eliminate our species entirely and claim our discoveries as their own innovations. Jake felt his anger rising. They're planning genocide? Yes. Even now, a massive Coalition fleet is gathering at the edge of Drakmori space. They plan to find the Nexus and destroy it, along with every Drakmori still alive. How long do we have? Days, perhaps weeks? But Jake Morrison, there is hope. Your awakening is not an isolated event. When you rescued me and our bond was formed, it sent a signal through the quantum field that connects all human consciousness. Other humans across the galaxy are beginning to awaken to their true nature. Jake stood up again, feeling energy coursing through his body. How many others? I do not know the exact number, but it could be millions. Every human who carries the genetic markers left by my ancestors will feel the call. They will begin to understand their true purpose and gain the abilities needed to fulfill it. And what is our true purpose? Spark's scales brightened to a brilliant silver. To stand with the Drakmori against those who would destroy us. To use your natural talents for engineering and problem-solving to help us defend the Nexus. To ensure that the knowledge preserved there is used for the benefit of all species. Not just the Coalition. Jake felt a sense of destiny settling over him like a heavy cloak. Everything in his life had led to this moment. His skills as a mechanic, his instinct to help others, even his decision to work the night shift at Port Luna, all of it had been preparation for this. What do we need to do? First, we must survive the next few days. The Coalition forces that discarded me have realized their mistake. They know I am still alive and they are searching for me. If they find us, they will kill you and take me back for more experiments. How do you know they're looking for you? Spark's scales shifted to a warning red color. Because I can sense their approach. My genetic memories include knowledge of coalition technology and tactics. There are ships in this system that should not be here, and they are scanning for traces of Drakmori DNA. Jake felt his heart start beating faster. How long before they find us? Soon. We must leave Port Luna tonight, Jake Morrison. And we must reach the Nexus before the Coalition fleet arrives there. How? I don't have a ship, and even if I did, I don't know where the Nexus is. Spark looked at him with those ancient, wise eyes. The awakening process has given you more than just mechanical intuition, Jake Morrison. Deep in your genetic memory, you carry the navigation codes needed to find the Nexus. You will know the way when the time comes. And until then we run, we hide. And we pray that your awakening abilities develop quickly enough to keep us alive. Jake looked around his small apartment, knowing he would never see it again. Everything he had built in his 5 years at Port Luna was about to be left behind. But as he looked at Spark, he knew there was no choice. This small creature had suffered unimaginable torture to protect the knowledge of an ancient civilization. The least Jake could do was help him complete that mission. All right, Jake said, reaching for his tool bag. Let's go save the galaxy. Spark's scales shifted to a warm, grateful gold. Thank you, Jake Morrison of Earth. Your people would be proud of you. As Jake packed the few things they would need for their journey, he could not help but wonder if any of this was real. 24 hours ago, he had been a simple mechanic with a quiet life. Now he was apparently the descendant of ancient aliens, genetically programmed to be a guardian of cosmic knowledge. But looking at Spark, feeling the strange new awareness growing in his mind, Jake knew it was all true. The universe was much stranger and more dangerous than he had ever imagined, and somehow the fate of 2 entire species now rested in his hands. Jake and Spark made it halfway to the cargo bay before the alarm started screaming. Red warning lights flashed throughout Port Luna as security announcements echoed from every speaker. Coalition forces had arrived, claiming to investigate reports of illegal alien trafficking, but Jake knew they were really hunting for Spark. This way, Jake whispered, pulling Spark into a maintenance tunnel that ran beneath the main corridors. The space was narrow and dark, filled with pipes and cables that hummed with electrical current. Spark's scales had turned completely black, a camouflage response that Jake had never seen before. They are here sooner than I expected, Jake Morrison. We must reach the cargo bay quickly. Jake led them through the maze of service tunnels, using his knowledge of the station's layout to avoid the main security checkpoints. But as they moved, he began to notice something strange happening to his own perception. The tunnel systems that he had walked through hundreds of times suddenly seemed different. He could see weak points in the construction, places where the metal was stressed or where the electrical systems were overloaded. More importantly, he could sense the locations of security cameras and scanning devices as if his brain was automatically mapping the station's surveillance network. Is this part of the awakening? He asked Spark as they paused at a junction between 2 tunnels. Yes. Your human brain is accessing genetic memories that contain advanced engineering knowledge. You are beginning to see technology the way my ancestors did. Jake tested this new ability by looking at a power distribution panel on the tunnel wall. Without conscious thought, he understood exactly how the system worked and could identify 3 ways to improve its efficiency. The knowledge felt natural, as if he had always known it. They reached the cargo bay through a ventilation shaft that Jake had never used before but somehow knew would be unguarded. The bay was enormous, filled with ships of every size and type. Jake led Spark toward the back corner where older vessels waited for repair or scrapping. There. Jake pointed to a beat-up cargo hauler that looked like it had seen better decades. That one still has working engines. Spark looked at the ship with his enhanced vision. The hull is damaged and the life support systems are failing. Are you certain it can reach space? Jake studied the vessel with his newly awakened perception. The ship was in terrible condition, but he could see exactly what needed to be fixed and how to do it quickly. Give me 10 minutes. As Jake worked on the ship's systems using parts scavenged from nearby wrecks, Coalition security forces spread through the station. Jake could hear their heavy boots marching down the main corridors and their alien voices calling out orders in languages he did not recognize. The leader of the Coalition forces was a Kytheran named Commander Keth Zarok. Jake had never seen a Kytheran before, but Spark's genetic memories provided detailed information about the species. They were tall and thin, with gray skin and black eyes that could see in multiple spectrums of light. Kitherans were known for their ruthlessness and their skill at hunting down fugitives. They are systematically searching every section of the station, Spark reported, his scales shifting to a deep purple as he monitored the Coalition forces through his enhanced senses. Zarok is using quantum scanners to look for traces of Drakmori DNA. Jake finished rewiring the cargo hauler's navigation system and moved on to the engines. His hands seemed to move on their own, making adjustments that his conscious mind did not fully understand. The awakening process was accelerating, flooding his brain with knowledge that had been dormant for millions of years. How long before they reached this section? Jake asked. Minutes. But Jake Morrison, there is another problem. I can sense other Coalition ships in orbit around the station. Even if we escape Port Luna, they will pursue us. Jake activated the cargo hauler's engines and felt them rumble to life. The ship was still in poor condition, but it would fly. Then we'll have to outrun them. As they prepared to launch, Jake's enhanced perception picked up something that made his blood run cold. The quantum scanners that Zarok was using were not just looking for Spark, they were also scanning for human DNA with specific genetic markers. The same markers that indicated Drakmori ancestry. They're not just hunting you, Jake realized. They're looking for awakened humans. Spark's scales flashed bright red with alarm. The Coalition has discovered the connection between our species. They know that humans are beginning to awaken, and they want to stop the process before it spreads. Jake felt a surge of protective anger. The Coalition was not just planning to commit genocide against the Drakmori. They were preparing to eliminate any human who might stand against them. The cargo bay doors began to open as Jake started the launch sequence. But before they could escape, Coalition forces burst into the bay through multiple entrances. Energy weapons discharged, filling the air with crackling bolts of deadly plasma. Jake's awakened instincts took over. Without conscious thought, he began piloting the cargo hauler with skills he had never learned, weaving between the energy blasts and using the other ships in the bay as cover. The vessel's engines screamed as Jake pushed them beyond their design limits. The main exit is blocked, Spark observed, watching the tactical situation through the ship's sensors. Zarok has positioned his forces to prevent our escape. Jake studied the cargo bay with his enhanced vision, looking for alternatives. There, an emergency airlock used for maintenance operations, barely large enough for their ship but accessible through a gap in the Coalition forces. Hold on, Jake warned as he spun the cargo hauler into a tight barrel roll that should have torn the aging ship apart. Instead, his intuitive understanding of the vessel's stress points allowed him to push it to its absolute limits without breaking it. They shot through the emergency airlock with meters to spare, emerging into the black space around Port Luna. Immediately, Jake's sensors detected 6 Coalition warships moving to intercept them. The cargo hauler was no match for military vessels, but Jake's awakened abilities gave him advantages that the Coalition pilots did not expect. He could predict their movements by understanding their tactical programming, and he could push his own ship beyond what any normal pilot would dare attempt. The chase through the Port Luna system became a deadly game of cat and mouse. Jake used his knowledge of stellar mechanics to hide behind asteroids and use gravity wells to alter their course in ways that confused the Coalition ships. But the cargo hauler was taking damage, and Jake knew they could not run forever. We need to reach hyperspace, Jake said as another energy blast shook their ship. But the hyperdrive is too damaged to make a safe jump. Spark moved closer to Jake's pilot seat, his scales shifting to a brilliant gold color. Jake Morrison, what I am about to do will be painful for both of us, but it is our only chance. What are you talking about? I'm going to share my genetic memories with you directly. The process will give you the knowledge needed to repair the hyperdrive and navigate to the Nexus. But it will also accelerate your awakening beyond safe limits. Jake felt the cargo hauler shudder as another Coalition ship scored a direct hit. What does that mean? It means the awakening process that should take weeks will happen in minutes. Your brain will be flooded with millions of years of Drakmori knowledge all at once. Many humans cannot survive such an experience. Another blast rocked the ship, and Jake saw sparks flying from the damaged hyperdrive. And if we don't do it, then we die here, and the Coalition fleet will find the Nexus undefended. Jake looked at the Coalition ships closing in around them and made his decision. Do it. Spark placed one small, clawed hand on Jake's arm. Immediately, Jake felt like lightning was coursing through his brain. Images flashed before his eyes: alien worlds, ancient technologies, the rise and fall of civilizations that existed before Earth's sun was born. He experienced the first meeting between Drakmori explorers and the primitive humans on Earth. He felt the genetic modifications being made to help humanity survive and evolve. He understood the true purpose of the human species, not just to be guardians of Drakmori knowledge, but to be partners in protecting the galaxy from those who would use ancient power for evil. The pain was incredible, but Jake forced himself to focus on the immediate crisis. His hands flew over the cargo hauler's controls, making repairs that should have been impossible with the available parts. He rerouted power systems, bypassed damaged circuits, and rebuilt the hyperdrive using techniques that no human engineer had ever learned. Within minutes, the cargo hauler was transformed from a barely functional wreck into a ship that could outrun anything the Coalition had. Jake engaged the hyperdrive just as Commander Zarok's flagship moved in for the killing blow. The universe stretched around them as they entered hyperspace, leaving the Coalition forces behind. But Jake could barely appreciate their escape. His brain was still processing the flood of information from Spark's memories, trying to integrate millions of years of knowledge into a mind that had been designed to handle it. "The first phase is complete," Spark said, his scales returning to their normal purple and silver pattern. "You now carry within your consciousness the basic knowledge needed to reach the Nexus and defend it." Jake looked at his hands on the ship's controls and realized that he now understood alien technology at an intuitive level. He could see the design principles behind every system, could predict the Nexus appeared before them like something from a dream. Jake had expected to find a planet, but the Drakmori stronghold was something far more amazing. Hidden within a nebula that twisted space and time around itself, the Nexus was a living city that grew from crystalline formations the size of mountains. Ancient Drakmori architecture merged with the natural crystal structures, creating buildings that seemed to breathe with their own inner light. "It's beautiful," Jake whispered as he guided their damaged cargo hauler through the nebula's maze of energy fields. Spark's scales glowed with pride and sadness. "This is all that remains of my people's great civilization. Once we had 1,000 worlds like this. Now there is only the Nexus and fewer than 300 of my people left alive." As they approached the crystalline city, Jake's enhanced senses detected massive defensive systems hidden throughout the nebula. Weapons that could destroy entire fleets lay dormant, waiting for commands that might never come. But Jake also sensed something else, a growing network of human consciousness that was spreading across the galaxy like wildfire. The awakening was accelerating beyond anything Spark had predicted. Millions of humans were discovering their true heritage and gaining abilities they had never known they possessed. On Coalition ships throughout the galaxy, human crew members were turning against their alien commanders. Human colonies were rallying to defend Drakmori refugees they had never known existed. "Your people are remarkable, Jake Morrison," Spark observed as they docked at one of the Nexus landing platforms. "The awakening process is spreading faster among humans than it ever did among the Drakmori." 3 Drakmori elders waited to greet them as they emerged from their ship. These were not the small, twisted creatures that Jake had expected based on Spark's condition. They were magnificent beings, each the size of a large horse, with scales that shifted through every color of the rainbow, and wings that could blot out the sun. The eldest, a female whose scales were silver with age, stepped forward and bowed deeply to Jake. "Jake Morrison of Earth, guardian and protector. You are welcome in the Nexus. I am Elder Zarathul, keeper of the archive. We have waited 60 million years for your people to return to us." Jake felt overwhelmed by the formal greeting. "I'm just a mechanic. I don't know if I'm the person you've been waiting for." "You saved the life of Vex Hydoron when you had nothing to gain and everything to lose," Elder Zarathul replied. "You risked your life to protect our knowledge from those who would misuse it. If that does not make you a guardian, then the word has no meaning." Spark, now freed from the growth-suppressing chemicals that had kept him small, was beginning to return to his natural size. Jake watched in amazement as his friend grew larger by the hour, his twisted wings straightening and his scales brightening with renewed health. But their reunion was cut short by urgent warnings from the Nexus defense systems. The Coalition fleet had found them. Hundreds of warships were moving through the nebula, their weapons charged and their intentions clear. Elder Zarathul led Jake and Spark to the central archive chamber, a vast dome filled with living crystal formations that hummed with stored information. The Coalition comes to destroy us and claim our knowledge for themselves, but they do not understand what they face. Jake looked at the archive in wonder. Each crystal contained the complete history and scientific knowledge of entire civilizations. The Drakmori had been collecting and preserving this information for millions of years, waiting for the day when it could be shared freely among all sentient species. "We have to protect this," Jake said, feeling the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. "Yes," Elder Zarathul agreed, "but not in the way you might think. The greatest protection for knowledge is not to hide it, but to share it so widely that it cannot be destroyed." She led Jake to a massive crystal formation at the center of the archive. "This is the consciousness amplifier designed by your ancestors before they left for Earth. It can broadcast the awakening signal to every human in the galaxy simultaneously." Jake stared at the ancient device, understanding its purpose through his genetic memories. "You want to awaken every human at once? It is the only way to ensure that the knowledge survives. If millions of humans carry the archive's contents in their minds, the Coalition cannot destroy it by conquering one world." Spark moved to Jake's side, his golden eyes filled with determination. "But the amplifier requires a massive energy source to function. Traditionally, a Drakmori elder would sacrifice their life force to power it." Elder Zarathul nodded gravely. "I am prepared to make that sacrifice. My people have waited too long for freedom." Jake felt a surge of protective anger. No, there has to be another way. As Coalition forces breached the outer defenses of the Nexus, Jake's awakened consciousness explored the amplifier's design with desperate intensity. The device needed vast amounts of biological energy to function, but it did not necessarily require death. Jake's human physiology, enhanced by the awakening process, could channel the necessary power without fatal consequences. "I can do it," Jake realized. "My awakened DNA can handle the energy load without burning out." "Jake Morrison, the risk is enormous," Spark warned. "If the process goes wrong, you could lose your mind or worse. And if we don't try, every human and Drakmori in the galaxy could die," Jake replied. "That's not a risk I'm willing to take." Coalition troops were fighting their way through the Nexus corridors as Jake placed his hands on the consciousness amplifier. The ancient crystal responded to his touch, recognizing the genetic markers that identified him as a guardian. Power flowed through him like liquid fire, but Jake held on, channeling the energy into the amplifier's broadcasting array. The signal that erupted from the Nexus was unlike anything the galaxy had ever experienced. It reached every human consciousness simultaneously, carrying with it the complete genetic memories of both species. In an instant, billions of humans understood their true heritage and gained access to millions of years of accumulated knowledge. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. On Coalition ships throughout the galaxy, human crew members suddenly understood advanced alien technology at an intuitive level. They began sabotaging their own vessels and turning against their alien commanders with skills they had never learned but somehow knew. Human colonies that had been defenseless against Coalition attacks suddenly possessed the knowledge needed to build powerful defensive systems from common materials. Human engineers began reverse engineering Coalition technology with an understanding that baffled their former allies. But the most dramatic change occurred on the human homeworld itself. As the awakening signal reached Earth, every human on the planet simultaneously remembered their origins. The revelation that they were descendants of ancient aliens, genetically designed to be guardians of cosmic knowledge, fundamentally changed human civilization in a matter of hours. Commander Xerok's fleet, which had been preparing to assault the Nexus, suddenly found itself surrounded by human vessels that had appeared from across the galaxy. Ships that should have been primitive by Coalition standards were using technology that the aliens had never seen before. Jake maintained his connection to the amplifier as the battle raged around the Nexus. Through the network of awakened human consciousness, he could sense the tide of the conflict turning. Coalition forces that had expected an easy victory were being overwhelmed by opponents who understood their technology better than they did. But the real victory came when Jake felt a familiar presence touch his mind through the quantum field. Other humans across the galaxy were linking their consciousness with his, sharing the burden of powering the amplifier and strengthening the awakening signal. Together, they spoke with one voice that reached every sentient being in the galaxy. Humans and Drakmori were no longer separate species hiding from persecution. They were partners in protecting the knowledge that could benefit all civilizations. The Coalition fleet began to withdraw as their human crew members turned against them in overwhelming numbers. Ships that had come to destroy the Nexus were now defending it, their alien commanders imprisoned or fled. As the immediate danger passed, Jake finally released his connection to the amplifier. He collapsed to his knees, exhausted but triumphant. Spark, now grown to his full magnificent size, caught him before he could fall. "It is done," Elder Zarathul said, her scales glowing with joy. "The knowledge is safe, scattered among millions of minds where it can never be destroyed." Jake looked around the archive chamber, where human and Drakmori worked together to repair the damage from the battle. For the first time in millions of years, the two species were truly united. "What happens now?" Jake asked. Spark's scales shifted to a warm gold that Jake had learned meant contentment. "Now we rebuild. The Coalition's power is broken. Their human crews awakened to the truth. The galaxy will be a very different place from now on." In the years that followed, Jake Morrison became known throughout the galaxy as the first Guardian, the human who had bridged the gap between two ancient species and restored balance to the cosmos. The Nexus became a center of learning where beings from every world could come to chat. How Coalition W